On today's World Insight, as the countdown to the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg begins, here's a closer look at the life and work of a world-class conductor whose music career spans decades and continents. Music to the ears with maestro Valery Gergiev.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. The BRICS Summit is set to be held between 22nd to the 24th in August in Johannesburg, South Africa. The BRICS countries including China, Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa. The BRICS cooperation mechanism has made remarkable achievements, including cultural and people-to-people exchanges. One of the world-renowned cultural icons from BRICS countries is maestro Valery Gergiev. He is one of the best conductors in the world today. I visited him in St. Petersburg and dropped in one of his concerts there. As the artistic and general director of the Mariinsky Theatre, Gergiev has turned the Mariinsky, with its century-old traditions, into one of the world's most dynamic opera and ballet companies. He has nurtured an endless stream of artists. All those years, Gergiev's international performances were no less intense. He has worked with most of the world's leading orchestras and has set up numerous international music festivals. I visited Maestro Gergiev backstage during one of his rehearsals, and he kindly invited me for a morning tea. Our conversation started from tea and coffee.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, fantastic.
So when we say thank you, we say like that in Chinese.
Really?
Yeah.
I remember that was probably 5 years ago. Probably. It's the last time we worked together, I think. It was.
Yes.
Could be
probably even earlier than that. Yeah. It was at the
But you
time
get
when
younger and younger. That's why I thought it was.
I learned from your example.
But you know, it's amazing that in China I saw yet another huge project close to be materialized, because outside the center of Beijing there is a new opera house, new concert hall, new museum, new library, even kind of Disneyland. So there will be a lot of people. I could see, because we went there. A lot of people will have, even if they live not in the center of Beijing, they will have all the cultural, possibilities.
Yes.
So that's a very, very smart idea.
Working relationship with a lot of your wonderful partners and colleagues around the world. Nurturing. Huh?
Yes, and
It's important,
we
isn't
keep
it?
it this way. We keep it this because musicians, as you know very well, are deeply, deeply focused on this incredibly rich world of classical music, opera, ballet, instrumental music, of course. And when we think of France or when we think of Italy, immediately we think of Debussy or Verdi or Puccini. So we don't have to read the news and what is France, because we have this enormously rich world where what is French, what is Italian, what is German, Austrian, and so on, Russian, is very dear to us, close to our hearts, and it never leaves this. So nothing can change it. Nothing.
There's such an urgency to reconnect.
Yeah, correct.
And relearn in a way.
Yeah. But every nation, even small nations, went through very unexpected and very difficult circumstances, but now it's in many, many ways critical moments. So in my opinion, arts and music, deep, serious culture, national roots, have to play an enormous role.
And now you are playing a great role, because now we are sitting in your home turf. Mariinsky Theatre right behind you, the model of it. You are playing a big part in making it happen. So what is it like to be back in the home turf, so to speak?
I'm grown in south of Russia, in Caucasus. I'm Ossetian by birth, Ossetian, my nationality, and so the city where I grew up is surrounded by very high mountains, very high, more than 5,000 meters. It's quite high. And even being child, I was able to enjoy and to be close to wild nature, really close. Even from our balcony window, you see the great mountain, which is 5,600. And to the left, another one. Where there's good, you see sunlight, and then you see this snowy, this beautiful, many other, a little lower, so in the mountains. That gives you a maybe more sensitive understanding of what kind of beautiful world we inherited, so our generations.
Or the grandness of the world, yeah?
Yes, and one thinks how to, let's say, pass it to our children, grandchildren. So I'm not panicking, I'm not saying we have to save planet, but the beauty of the world and the power of nature is playing enormous role. And you cannot learn it through mobile telephone. It's not.
Sometimes the rhythm of the nature, the rhythm of the childhood, plays a huge role in all of us, isn't it?
Well, I remember things when I was 9, 10 years old. I remember first concerts. I remember even the words, even the voice of a woman, a lady, who was narrating. She was, before the performance, explaining to us, to children, to kids, what is the music like and who is the composer, what is the story behind this composition. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. These words I remember. I remember how she looked. I remember her name. Then I met maybe millions of people. Well, I don't remember everything, but the first childhood, they are so strong and they're always with us.
How much do we understand our own culture?
Well, I can say I wish we here in Russia learn more about Chinese culture, especially ancient culture. I wish we keep our knowledge of European or North American or South American, which is very different. But I think we don't know enough about, it's in a way a little bit mysterious culture because of language, because of a certain, let's say, combination of very important religion, very important literature, history, very important music, paintings. Some paintings go back 500 or nearly 700-800 years. It tells you a lot. But I wish we have opportunity to pass it to our children, and they pay much more attention and spend much more time to understand. The power of English language is big. We are talking in English now, but somehow I predict the world will continue to change, and many important parts of the world will call for more attention to their own rich history. And I stress it about China. It's such a huge history. We know certain things, and I was at least in maybe 12, maybe 15 cities in China. I still feel it's not enough. And I want to go back to Tian, for example, and to see these warriors standing, because it's so hypnotic. So I was there just watching, not talking to anyone next to me, just
Watching them.
watching, and the breadth of history through these hundreds and hundreds of years is so embracing you. So we can learn from our culture. In St. Petersburg, we are celebrating now only 320 years. It's a young city, but it is not only Russian culture. It's one of the most beautiful Italian cities, St. Petersburg.
Yes.
The great Italian architects, Quarenghi, Rossi, Rastrelli, these are legendary names for Italy. But St. Petersburg, the beauty of the city is very much to do with, even our Mariinsky historical architect, Kavos, is also Italian. But we also know that in Moscow, which is much older city, there are many, many events which are well documented, so we learn it from Russian history and Russian operas. Boris Godunov, oh, you say, I learned history. Prince Igor, you learn history. Great opera, Kovanshchina of Mussorgsky. It's a lot about history, and not only history of Russia, it's also history of Europe altogether. I think it is wonderful opportunity to learn.
You are very good in bringing different cultures to your performances. I remember when you were performing in China, you brought to the very first piece a Chinese repertoire, and it won applause from the audience. Actually, it was one of those revolutionary ones. But actually, when you played it, it felt like so international. So how is it like to select your repertoires during your performance in China?
It is important to stress that great composers expressing the most wonderful, beautiful, sensitive, emotional, sometimes very expressive characters of their own nature, of their own culture, of their own people. That's why the power of Verdi is not only flourishing in Italy. We perform here 15 different operas of Verdi every season, and public is ecstatic, happy. The power of German musical tradition, which be Beethoven, or Bach, or Brahms, there are many. So it's in display all the time. We have 10 operas of Wagner. So we go deep into the culture of another nation. But the power of composer is to break the borders. So there are no borders. You can say now, oh, this is European Union, oh, this is non-European Union. Music doesn't know this. Music doesn't understand border. The language we speak is also very powerful, goes across the borders. But music, more than anything else, doesn't need translation. It goes into your heart, it goes into your brain, but also into your emotional world. That's why nothing can destroy the power of music, and music unites, doesn't separate people, brings them together. And this is what probably is needed today, even more than diplomacy, which I believe in diplomacy, but maybe the greatest diplomats of all times.
For you, a conductor, who are performing around the world different pieces, how much do you have to go into that culture in order to learn? You know, when you play the Chinese pieces, how much do you need to learn? And how would you observe from the audience whether they really get it, your interpretation? What was it like of those moments, you know?
Look, first of all, I am lucky to have wonderful musicians working with me. I will start with my orchestra, the Mariinsky Theatre.
Well, very diplomatic answer, I'm saying.
But conductor is not playing He's not even screaming, not singing. He makes some strange gestures. It's a little unusual to see. Why? Because he has to provoke, he has to build from the power of these 100 musicians a little miracle. When a little miracle
Every time.
every time, unfortunately, you really have no forgiveness. You have to create a little miracle. Public feels it immediately, because public also feels if it's a little bit. What is our enemy number one? Boredom. Boring means is not what composer wanted. No, great composers. If we know Bach, sorry, but Bach is more than 300 years ago. Oh, so how his music survived? Because it's deep, it's beautiful, it's strong, it's very smart, but not boring. It doesn't put you to sleep. It wakes you up. The same with Beethoven, the same with Italians, the same with French, the same with Russians.
But you have your own spice.
Well, when I see the music in front of me, the first look, it takes maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds, you see more or less the character of writing. So it can be Chinese, it can be Japanese, it can be American, but you see, because the system, the education we all have, helps us to go quick into the point. What is, oh, this is the main motif, okay? Oh, this is another tempo, okay? Oh, this is a triumph. And this is a moment of quietness. And this is maybe a moment of happiness. You have to figure out immediately. Our professional, let's say, duty is to not to upset composer. Yes, composer lived 200 or 300 years ago, but our conscience helps to find the way that you think, oh, this is what composer wanted. Then you can tell colleagues, you play fantastically well, but maybe composer wanted it a little bit more quietly played, or maybe a little bit more energetic. So they start to think, oh, energetic, okay, so they start to play. So this is always a balance between what you already achieved and what you have to achieve yet in the next 20 or 30 or 40 minutes. And this is what makes conductor sometimes an important figure. Sometimes he is an ambassador from the kingdom of composer to the orchestra, and through the orchestra to the public. And public can be millions and millions of people.
And therefore, a conductor, a great one, is a great communicator too.
Has to be.
Bringing all these worlds together. I see we're a lack of great communicators these days in our world. We have so much division, it seems, right now. As an artist, how do you see, the reality today? How are you coping with the reality, not only from your own personal experiences, but also, the way forward?
Of course, we all think about our world. We all try to understand, to analyze, to even interpret. I never saw in the last, let's say, 50 years, since my very, very young age, and I became a student in a conservatory of music here. The city was called Leningrad, typically Leningrad. Of course, the original name had to be restored, and it was restored in 1992. We went back to St. Petersburg, because what you enjoyed always in Leningrad was St. Petersburg, because the center didn't change, thanks God. One of the reasons why the city kept this beauty, because the capital moved to Moscow, and it was like a blessing from the skies. Nothing was built in the center of St. Petersburg, then Leningrad, no administrative buildings. This was the fate of Moscow. And Moscow is a powerful city, very beautiful, but it's very different. This is like a museum a little bit. the way it looks now is practically the same like it looked 200 years ago, which is fantastic.
I certainly feel it.
Yeah. Now, another important element is that we remember, our generation, the echo of Second World War. We remember. We also remember how several big nations were trying to overcome this huge division. And it was clear that everyone, or most of leaders, political leaders, were somehow trying to overcome it.
Our world is changed very fast. It's not like whether you like the speed or not. We are all being swirled into something that we do not know yet. So, as an artist right now, how much do you see you can play your role?
I learned one thing. No matter what happens, all of us have to do what we have to do. If I forget I'm a musician, I will be somehow punished. I'm not talking about physical punishment or any other sort of, but you don't have to forget what is your mission, or who are you as being born musician, or maybe you want to be a politician, well, but then you lose something. And I try not to forget it, not for 1 second, and to play music, no matter French or Russian or Chinese or German, Austrian, American, it will stay one of my priorities for sure. And probably, second point, you never know who is in the hall. Sometimes you come to a small city, but you give a concert, you think, oh, it's not Beijing, or it's not Moscow, it's a small city. You have to respect your public, even if you don't know one person. But you have to think, because Johann Sebastian Bach, maybe the greatest, one of the greatest ever musicians, composers, went by foot many, many miles to listen to a great player playing organ, the great instrument. But Mr. Buxtehude was his name, much less significant figure today. But then he was a star. And Bach walked maybe 10 miles, no cars, no flights, no telephones, just to listen to a great master. Then Bach grew so much that nobody compares them. But Buxtehude did not know there was this boy.
You never know what kind of seeds you're planting.
Correct. And we wish music can help. We wish politicians will learn how to hear each other. At this point, they, with the exception of few, they don't. They think they hear each other inside one block. But inside one block, they hear each other, but somehow one voice is heard all the time and other voices heard not so often or not so regularly. Then comes so-called another block or third block, and we only can pray and wish for quicker recovery for our world. But musicians cannot play together if they don't hear. If you come like this, there is no orchestra. There will be a chaos. So the main and powerful symbol of being a musician is you hear. You hear someone else playing, sometimes 100 playing, but everyone plays. You look at the music, but you hear everything, smallest thing, hear and react. This is what the world needs to become a decently good ensemble, orchestra.
I like that.
This is the most powerful wish, most powerful symbol of future success, to come together and hear each other. You cannot ignore Chinese voice. You cannot ignore Russian voice. You cannot ignore Europe. You cannot ignore North America. But you cannot ignore. You can say, I disagree. But ignore doesn't work. And this is what is danger for the future and also for our children. Because it, to such a degree, not to hear, to such a level of ignorance, becomes a deadly risk for our future.
So I really wonder, is there one or two pieces that you yourself personally go to for strength?
There is something in me which always wants a bouquet, how to say. You have roses, red roses, fantastic. Then sometimes you have red, yellow, white, diversity. So the more colors in the bouquet, for me, is maybe the nicest bouquet I can imagine. If I stay with Bruckner, fantastic, I'm happy. At some point, I want to hear Debussy or Berlioz, which is French. So Austrian or French, then you think, oh, what about Russian? Mussorgsky, genius, great. 2 days later, I hope there will be Italian. So every week, I go through 4, 5 different cultures, but all of them extremely high level of intellectual, emotional, expressive, philosophical. It's a mixture of all these.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My honor.
Thank you so much for so generous with your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
That's my conversation with Maestro Valery Gergiev in Mariinsky Theatre in St. Petersburg. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, you can always find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.